Welcome back to our panel discussion, Internationalization with and After Corona. Please welcome my fellow panelists, Tim Flink, from your side, perspective on the right-hand side. Next to him, Anna-Katharina Hornidge. I also like to welcome Stefan Connerman and Christian Müller. Welcome. And I would like to start with Anna-Katharina Hornidge. You are Professor of Global Sustainable Development at the University of Bonn and Director of the German Development Institute, dem Deutschen Institut für Entwicklungspolitik. Before coming to Bonn earlier this year, you were head of the Department of Social Sciences and the Working Group Development and Knowledge Sociology at the Leibniz Center for Tropical Marine Research and Professor for Social Science in the marine tropics at the University of Bremen. And Anna-Katharina, I'm wondering how Corona does affect your research, because I know that, well, marine tropics are not around the corner here. It's not that you can just go to the Baltic Sea and do your kind of research. So what does the pandemic do to researchers like you?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for the kind invitation to this very interesting conference. Well, the German Development Institute largely works in and on developing regions, so in Latin America, in Africa, different parts of Africa and different parts of Asia. And of course the pandemic means that we had to, well, first of all, fly back quite a number of our colleagues. That was my one of my first acts in as a new director, to be honest. I started on the 1st of March, and 2 weeks later we flew back 23 colleagues from all over, basically, the world. And of course, it then meant that we had to restructure and rethink quite a bit of the methodology in some of our research projects. In the beginning we waited. We were still thinking, let's see how far we can basically push back some of the trips to the research regions. But by now, especially for a number of PhD theses, we had to adjust and either develop well, a contingency plan, basically, and instead of doing qualitative interviews and ethnographic research, for instance, in Manila or in Jakarta, Singapore, we now put a lot more emphasis on a scientometric analysis of what is being published. It's a project that looks at sea level change discourses, so you can of course study a discourse by studying it locally, but you can, and by focusing on everyday practices of discourse use and discourse construction, but you can also study it, not as well, but you can study it also by focusing on the discourse in scientific writing and policy relevant writing. So I mean, that's just one example, but I'm sure the colleagues have others. It means that we look at every single project and adjust.
What does that do to the overall productivity of research?
Well, I think that's very much a question related to how long is this situation going to last. No? In terms of productivity, meaning writing, analyses and also publishing, my impression is that in many aspects the time has been very productive, maybe even partly sometimes more productive. But of course, that only holds as long as there is empirical data that haven't been published yet, that haven't been analyzed yet. So at some stage there is a limit, and obviously it's a substantial challenge and limit to the discussions that we have in terms of not wanting to research regions from afar, but actually work together with partners in these research regions for understanding everyday life worlds better, for jointly developing also some of the answers or potential solutions even. We are a research institute that conducts a lot of applied research, so the involvement of stakeholders, the involvement of partners and their networks is absolutely crucial for ensuring that some of the network can be some of the research can be taken up and can be developed in a way that it comes with a local fit, fitting to the local context.
Thank you very much. Tim Flink, you're a postdoctoral researcher and lecturer in science policy research and social studies of science based at Humboldt University in Berlin and at the German Center of Higher Education Research and Science Studies. Prior to your academic engagement, you worked as the personal board assistant to the EU Liaison Office of the German Research Organizations in Brussels, especially supporting the German Research Foundation's president and the Secretary General in representing the DFG's international interests. So now you're doing research, and you are doing a very interesting research which is also focusing on the cooperation of people or researchers from different background, different descent. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
First of all, also thank you to Stefan Connerman and the University of Bonn for having me here. So indeed, I have two souls in my chest, so to speak. So one interest, as you said, is as a research topic, the governance of science. So I'm interested in how different states in the world, or also the European Commission, is regulating science, so to speak. So the interaction between scientists, but also organizations that cater for scientific research and higher education. And indeed, as we've discussed today, internationalization is one of the big topics. And whether Corona has made a difference is yet to be defined, I would say. So if you look at the current situation with the framework program that is developing Horizon Europe as the successor of Horizon 2020, we have a budget cut at the moment, so there was a different budget envisaged, and probably that cut is due to the current economic crisis that hit Europe quite hard. Next to Brexit, that we shouldn't forget about. Then the second research question that I am following is what science policy actually do with researchers on the ground. So how does it affect their life world situation, their interactions, their construction of the social world that they're in. And it is, to me, in a double sense, a catastrophe at the moment to do this research, because COVID has really hit hard on the question of international exchange. So I'm currently co-leading an EU project on science diplomacy, a huge collaborative project. And I think we are 9 institutions in Europe. There's a partnering institution in the US, in Russia, in China. And it is really hard for us at the moment to do our research, basically, because similar to Anna-Katharina, our research is basically focusing on interviews, expert interviews, ethnographic field research. So I was doing research on Sesame in Jordan, which is a Science for Peace initiative, where you are supposed to observe how researchers from Israel collaborate with researchers from Iran, from Egypt, from the Palestinian Authority regions, but you can't go there. And so it's really hard to find alternatives if you're into this kind of sociology of knowledge, ethnographic research, and you can't just bypass that by serving these people. So it really is a challenge at the moment.
What is the objective of this research? To see how well they work together, people from different backgrounds or descent or nationalities, how well they work together, or how the institutions can support the cooperation? What is the basic fundamental research question there?
So one of the fundamental research questions among others is, and I think we have had this discussion also today, we expect academia to be born by some sort of, we call it universalistic norms. As David has already mentioned, Robert K. Merton from the 1940s. So there's an argument should be valid, a scientific statement should be valid no matter where it comes from in the world. You respect somebody else due to his or her academic qualities and properties and competences and skills, and not because he's black or from Japan or whether he's senior or junior. And this is an idealistic norm. So on the other hand, if we look at how countries from the global north, for example, or let's say researchers from the global north collaborate with researchers from the global south with completely different properties and interests, with different ideas of how you criticize somebody in the public, for instance, or in a colloquium, it's yet to be defined empirically how this academic system is actually specific in the way that it can surmount these differences. And we have not so much valid data about that, not qualitative data at least.
Is there any way to replace that kind of research because that you can't do right now? Is there any way to keep on the work, keep on working?
Well, maybe I was a bit too fatalistic in the sense that yes, you can still go there, and you can go to a Max Planck Institute, which has probably more than 70 or 80% of so-called foreigners or international researchers on the spot, where you could also do ethnographic research, unless you're from Berlin-Mitte, as I am, and you're at the moment in a problematic situation with many corona cases being in your neighborhood. But in principle, you will find these places everywhere. So you find the global village, so to speak, in one specific institute, and it doesn't have to be a huge collaborative research project distributed around the world, or a large-scale research infrastructure such as CERN or Sesame to go there. But these are interesting spots I would like to go to and do my research on. Yeah.
Thanks so much for the time being. I would like to introduce Stefan Connerman. He is Vice President for International Affairs of the University of Bonn, Professor of Islamic Studies and Director of the Institute of Oriental and Asian Studies. You're also spokesperson for DFG Institute of Advanced Studies and spokesperson of the Bonn Center for Dependency and Slavery Studies, an excellence cluster. And I would like to address you first as the spokesperson of this excellence cluster, which is a pretty new excellence cluster, and the pandemic, I imagine, hit you also on a very fundamental basis, right? Because this kind of work that you're doing, the kind of research that you're doing there, is hard to do without going places, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is. So I think, well, the cluster. Well, of course, the corona crisis hit the cluster in March, and of course, well, there was something like, I think there was a first shock that lasted, I would say, just for one week. Yeah, so I think, but after the week, there was kind of a blackness during this week because Zoom wasn't invented at that time. So I think, and then after this first week. Then, of course, Zoom
after this first week, or even German universities discovered that there's something like Zoom.
There's something like Zoom. So, and then I think we had to clarify all the legal aspects of using Zoom in the university, and after that had been clarified, so we tried, of course, to keep the cluster running. So I think, and it took us, I would say, another 2 months, to get everybody in the cluster convinced that it is not a good idea, of course, to postpone everything, in 2021. So I think we started again while doing everything we could doing it remotely. So I think we started we started with our lecture series again, we started with workshops again, we started with conferences again. So I think that worked very well. So like this conference, we had hybrid conferences. So I think that was fine in a way. But of course, there is a massive problem with the research. I think, of course, we have textual studies as well. We do not have only social studies, studies from the social sciences, but textual studies. So I think it's 50% of the, for example, I take the PhD students as an example, 50% of the PhD students can just work on their thesis because they have the texts. So that is not the problem, but the other 50%, they are they are facing big challenges, and for us it is a question how to react, because we can't say that the crisis will be over in 2021. So I think there's a possibility for these PhD students that they can't go abroad in 2021. So I think they have to reconsider their PhD thesis or the design of their PhD thesis. So I think, and this is really a crucial point, when do you decide that you have to redesign your PhD thesis? And this is what we are talking about now.
But these are also crucial times for the excellence cluster. I mean, like, those are the first years right now. And so what does it do to your midterm strategy right now? I mean, if you lose the year 2021 for some of the substantial work that you were supposed to do, that you wanted to do, and you can still, as you said, do textual work and things like that, but what does it do to the overall strategy of the excellence cluster?
Yeah, but I think the overall strategy is not touched. So I think we will try, of course, to keep everything running. So even the research, we will try to keep the research running. And well, of course, you can publish. Yeah, if you have some kind of if you have some kind of research, you can publish your books and your volumes of collected articles and your articles as well. So I think this is something you can do. But in the end, of course, for a lot of researchers, there might be something like a break in the academic career, because they don't can collect material now. So I think then they don't have material to publish articles out of this. Yeah? So this can be a really significant break in the career of a postdoc researcher, for example.
But generally speaking, you don't sound that dissatisfied, actually, with the development since March, as if it went better than you actually expected.
Yes, it is. Yeah, no, I'm quite optimistic that we can, of course, they can achieve what we promised the DFG to do. So, but in the end, of course, we have to wait for how the situation will develop, and then we have, of course, every cluster of excellence will have talks with the DFG. So, of course, the DFG knows that the situation is very complicated. But I think in our cluster, where the situation is fine, but I know of clusters where the situation is, of course, worse, because they depend 100% on field research or on empirical studies, and for them, of course, it's a really big challenge.
Thank you very much. I will get back to you later in your role as the vice president of the university. But first, I'd like to introduce Christian Müller, who is Deputy Secretary General of the German Academic Exchange Service and head of the Berlin DAAD office. He has been with the DAAD for more than 18 years, and before becoming he was just calculating, is that correct? Yeah. Before becoming Secretary General, you were director of the newly created Department of Strategy at the DAAD head office. And I was wondering, the last 6 or 7 months or so for the DAAD, I think it was on the one hand very bad time in terms of international relations, but on the other hand, it was also kind of a good time for the DAAD, because you showed how important you are as an institution, right? So I was wondering, so what is your conclusion after the 6 or 7 months? Now even more people know that we need the DAAD, and we're in desperate need of the DAAD.
I hope you're right, and there are some signs for that. I would say very similar to what you said, Mrs. Hornidge. At the beginning, what we had to do in March, even April, May, was simply to solve some emergency questions of people in any place of the world wishing to come back to Germany, or foreigners being in Germany wanting to get back to their countries. Not in all cases we were sure that would be a good idea. Even there was a time in which the situation in Germany was worse than in many places in the world, and we would not suggest to all Germans to come back to their shores. But anyway, that was what phase one, if you like, the first phase in which we needed to adapt to a very critical, a very dramatic situation of a hygiene crisis, if you like. I mean, in the second phase, I would say we needed to adapt immediately programs, our scholarship programs, our programs in which we fund universities in projects. And amazingly enough, and we were talking about the the flexibility of a big university like Humboldt, if I may. And amazingly enough, I would say that the federal ministries, they were very open to react very fastly, and sometimes from one day to the other, we were able to change rules or to change certain conditions under which we do funding, which normally does take some months or years even. Change the stipend rate, for instance, a scholarship rate, that's a very, very big issue for us. and trying to change, to elevate normally to raise the rate is something which takes many months and rounds and discussions and so on. So under that very special circumstances, we did see a lot of flexibility, a lot of openness to adapt to what was needed, and that was very important. So we changed in a couple of programs. We changed the conditions in the sense that virtual and digital and online solutions would be eligible, and that's a major shift in our funding program. Now, if this is going to stay in the same way, in the same manner, we are still discussing, and we are not very well. We would not be very happy to see the future as basically virtual exchange and virtual cooperation. This is not what the DAAD stands for, because we stand for the people meeting, people traveling, people doing immersion into other cultures. So basically our philosophy and the mission we have, that would be questioned.
On the other hand, I remember your president talking about the CO2 footprint of the DAAD even before Corona, and in a way he always sounded like, well, we have to change something about the way we understand mobility, and there's your change that you were asking for.
Actually, I would even say that we are now, in this year and the year before, we are facing a triple fold, if this is the right English word, challenge, which is in first place exactly climate change and the question of what is our carbon footprint. If we take the number of, say, 140,000 persons who receive funding from us per year last year, this means basically 140,000 travels or trips. And
round trips,
and I would say 90% by airplane. Yeah. We haven't counted it, but I would say that must be the ratio, 90%. The second challenge, obviously, is the pandemic and fighting COVID-19. And the third is, in a sense, digitalization. Yeah. Because if we take digitalization as a solution, again, we question the value and the importance of physical mobility and the exchange of people. So yes, that's a very big challenge we are facing at the moment.
We were all kind of surprised when we heard about the high number of applicants for the winter semester, international applicants, that are at about 80% of the former years. And now I'm wondering, since the numbers are climbing and climbing, what does that mean to those students that actually want to come here? Are you still optimistic that most of them will be able to arrive this winter semester?
Well, there are some serious concerns, and I will very, very blunt about that. At this very moment, we do see a constellation of problems or of obstacles which are maybe hindering students to come to Germany. The first, obviously, is the question: are the universities capable of processing all these applications in a normal way? But this seems to be going fairly well. There had been some deferments or postponings by Unisys, but anyway, I think this is to be solved. Second, will students get a student visa? And that's maybe the most important and the most inhibitive obstacle we do see, because basically all German consulates and embassies, they are closed, or at least the consular services are closed, which means that not so easily you will find a day in which you can go there, do your application for a visa and process it. So that's the second. The third is simply traveling. I mean, we do have a risk warning from the German government, which tells you that basically all countries are not eligible to travel to Germany, besides some in Europe, but also this number is getting smaller, which does not mean that people cannot travel, but it means that they have to undergo quarantine and testing. And for that, and that's the last point, I do not see that universities are prepared to handle that. So some hundreds of international students asking for a quarantine accommodation.
So, Stefan, are universities prepared for that? Now I'm asking you, as in your role as a vice president,
vice president. So no, that was I think I can speak for the rectorate about being a member of the rectorate. This was a very interesting but a very intense experience to be part of a rectorate within a university facing a crisis like this. So I think there was a shock moment as well. So in the beginning, but then. The rectorate decided to work remotely. So from the beginning, from the start, and we met. I would say we met twice a day, just to communicate and to try to solve, because we wanted to solve all the problems of the university. And I think there were two foci. I think the first foci of challenges. The first challenge was, of course, the administration. So the administration is a very complex. Of course, at the university we are a very big university, and of course we have a very big administration. And it was very difficult, of course, to cope with the regulations that came from the government, because they changed from week to week or even from day to day, so to speak. And I think the university was always on the receiving end, and we had always to react to the new regulation that came from the government. And the second problem within the university is, of course, because we have a top-down perspective. Of course, how do we reach the people, the professor in the institute or the professor in the department? And this is a very complex undertaking as well, because if we come up with the kind of regulations, new regulations, and then of course we have to ask the deans of the faculties to provide the information, to get the information to every professor, and that was really a big task. But I think in the end, it worked out after I would say 8 weeks, and everybody in the university did a fantastic job. The administration did a fantastic job, the deans did a fantastic job, and I think in the end, I would say 90% of our professors and our teachers, the people who were teaching in the university, accepted the new situation and get very well adopted to the new situation.
So, being a big university, how many international incoming students do you have in a normal year?
Oh, that is difficult to say. So I think, I don't know the figures, but I think, of course, we're challenging the problems you have mentioned a second ago. So, the problem, we have a team where the second focus was on teaching, study and teaching, and of course, it is very problematic. We have a very problematic situation when it comes to the international students who apply for the programs. So, but in the end, we decided that everybody, we accepted everybody, of course. Normally, you have to be present. If to register, if you register, you have to be present at the university, and we skipped that. So everybody can stay at home. But of course, the problem is, the challenge is that then the teachers have to present something like a two-track system. So I think they have to work with students. With students who are here, who can be present in a seated classroom, and with students who are not here. And that is a big challenge for the teachers.
I was going to that direction because I was wondering, I guess that should be like 2,000 or something like that, international students, something like that, incoming students. And we are about 3 or 4, not even 4 weeks, 3 weeks away from the new semester. And I'm really not sure, maybe Christian, you can say something about that. Do we have any idea how many people will come in the next 2 or 3 or 4 weeks? My impression is right now, as the numbers are going up and up, we have no idea at all if they will come, like at the University of Bonn. Will there be 2,000 or 200 in 2 or 3 weeks? We don't know.
Well, the majority of international students is already here. So that's.
I mean the new incoming.
I know. Yes, I know. So I was going to that. So if a university like Bonn would have, I say, 3,500 international students. Out of those, 70% should be already here. And not so many did travel home in the last 6 months. We didn't see that. So they are basically staying here. So that reduces us to the question of newly enrolling or new freshmen. And that's, as you said, very difficult to foresee. Very difficult to foresee. We see the application numbers, but how many of those will manage to travel, manage to come and enroll, and definitely come here to start their study in presence?
Stefan
Very
Connerman?
difficult to say.
No, that is very difficult to predict. So that, but I think I don't see the problem. Yeah? So I think we don't have a problem. This is fine. It's okay. So the people can come when they can come. So that way, of course, we're willing to accept everybody, and of course, we take care for everybody who would like to come. So even if he or she has to go into quarantine or in isolation for 14 days, and I think everybody here is prepared to help them, these students. But in the end, well, it doesn't mean anything to us. Yeah, so they can come or they can stay. And I think the point is that we have to offer them a full-time online program. That is something that is a challenge for us. Even if they stay in America or in Nigeria or wherever. So I think we have to provide them with a 100% possibility to participate fully in the programs.
Anna-Katharina, in your research and in the situation at your institute right now, have you found yourselves in a new routine now? And right now you don't have that many open questions for the next couple of weeks, because basically you are just in a new situation now and you're handling the situation, or are there also very open pressing questions right now for you?
Well, I mean, it's an organizational question, but it's also, one could say, an epistemological question. No? So, and I thought it was very interesting what you just pointed out, how Germany suddenly became the risk space. And that is also something we experienced, where we suddenly had to reflect on, is it actually ethically correct to fly in several people to participate in that was for summer school, or would it be wiser basically to restructure it into a digital program? Now, for one of our educational programs called the Managing Global Governance School, it's a program that is organized for mid-career management, one could say, from countries, middle-income countries, so basically Brazil, China, India, Mexico, etc. And for this program we decided to restructure the whole program, that is 9 months long usually, into a digital program. It's a challenge because of the time zones. Not only because of the time zones, but we only have 2 hours a day where we can meet actually virtually with all of them. No? It ranges from Mexico to Australia, so the Australian participant always joins from 10 to 12 at night. Now with a shift in time it will be 12 to 2 at night, but that is then the morning in Mexico, and between 2 and 4 here in the afternoon. So that's of course a major challenge, and it means that there's sort of a balance to be struck between the actual virtual interaction, which is time intensive because you need to build the type of trust in order to allow for thorough communication. The questions of potential self-censorship comes up. Yeah? How much actual real content-wise real interaction is possible if everything could be recorded. Then there is the great firewall of China that my colleagues talk about, that causes technical problems. I mean, you need to find technological solutions that actually work from Mexico to Australia and back, so to say. And it means that you combine sort of the virtual interaction with the structured self-education in a way, but of course based on material that we provide. It's a new experience. All of us are going through these experiences. All of us have to add and share, I'm sure. but it is for the institute of the GDI Institute. It is the first time, and we are quite happy the way it is going. And at the same time, we do see substantial limitations in terms of actual exchange, exposure. No? The exposure to a different country is missing, and the building of a solid basis of trust, basically, that is usually an important part of creating a floor for further future interactions, and that, of course, is very much limited. No?
Tim, what is the most pressing question for you right now? You told me about the research project that you actually are applying for right now, which is also an interesting thing during pandemic times.
Yes, I mean, it's quite interesting. So I've handed in a research project, a minuta, at the DFG, which I invested or had invested much work, obviously, because it's a young research group fellowship. So in between February and March, and the topic is international collaborations. So in a double sense, it will be an issue with the DFG and the reviewers whether this is feasible. And obviously in February, or writing it up beforehand, you don't put in a disclaimer, what will happen due to Corona, not even February and March. I think we expected it to go that long and far, and we have no clue how long it lasts. So in a way, it's, you start becoming anxious about what's going to happen with it. If it is feasible. So it's not only about getting the money and getting the grant and all the reputation and all that, but whether you can actually do it then. So it's 6 years of funding, and you can't just sit on your table while you have promised ethnographic research next to interviews and the like. So it's not just inventing something else, Besides that, I would differentiate my current situation between research, teaching, and knowledge transfer. So there are also positive side effects that came along with the crisis, for example, in the sense of knowledge transfer. So our research project, the EU research project on science diplomacy had several outputs. One was a MOOC, so a massive online open course on science diplomacy, which we released, I think, in the summertime. And within 2 weeks, I think it was over 5,000 people who subscribed to this program, which is a very specific topic, and people did it. Webinars are packed with hundreds of people from all over the world. So I think somehow the virtual and digital world now that was thrust upon us also offered some new opportunities that wouldn't have been there. And it's great to see that outreach and also to have a community that gathers around this and works with that situation in a positive and constructive way. Teaching, I would say, was bad because it's not the same thing to be in a seminar, have vital discussions with your students face-to-face, although it was still possible, apart from the fact that you always had, to pull away your children. But as colleagues and friends tell me that work at the university in engineering or in medical science, it's a completely different thing. You can't just do a preparation course with your students online while they have to use their scalpel and work on corpse, So how do you do that? Or as an engineer, so much is about tacit knowledge production. You have to calibrate your machines. How do you do that?
But let's stay with the upside of the pandemic, if there is something like that, when it comes to internationalization. So things that, in a way, are advantages, things that are different now, but things that you like, and that you maybe even want to stay around once the pandemic is over. Tim, and then I would like to hear the others as well.
Thanks again for that. Just a small thing that I found positive in all these webinar, I think it was a trademark name, but you know what I mean, Zoom conferences and the like, it somehow flattened the hierarchy between people, which I found quite positive. So people with status, reputation, titles were more approachable because all were in the same boat and experiencing this situation, and you could chat with everyone in a more easygoing way. Also about research and academic things.
And would you agree with what Christian said earlier, that the decision-making processes were much speedier than ever?
Some things were speeded up, yes, but at the same time we are still in a university which is the most chaotic organizations of all, as we all know. It's a fact from higher education studies. So, so I wouldn't say it was, many things were as planned and very well organized as they could have been.
So let's keep on talking about the upsides. Anna-Katharina.
Well, a definite upside is, of course, that we can diversify our panels substantially, our events. I mean, we can get international speakers at a much higher and, well...
You could have done that before. You could have done virtual conferences before. Of course,
but... that's true. Of course, we could have done the virtual conference before. Probably attendeeship would not have looked as good as it does now. No? I mean, we are all learning how to communicate in these virtual forums and are slowly starting to understand that, as you said, there's a certain different set of rules, seemingly, that enables who makes him or herself heard, and how there's a different, it's a different style of communication, and it's, I mean, for us it is extremely positive that we can get international speakers from, not, I shouldn't say all over the world, because internet is not all over the world, but that makes a difference, and there's also a time element to it. No? So it seems that calendars didn't really free up, but we all managed to squeeze in more events and accept probably also more speeches, keynotes, etc. So that's definitely a big upside.
Thank you very much. Stefan.
Yeah, well, I think Anna and Thomas have already said or mentioned a lot of points, but well, I just would like to add one point. I think this is a financial point. Yeah? So I think mobility is always connected to finances. You have to pay for the flights, and you have to pay for the mobility. You have, of course, and I think from a perspective, for example, of foreign funding institutions like the DAAD or GFG, well, there might be advantages, of course, that when sometimes people stay at home and take part in conferences and workshops virtually. So because it saves a lot of money, yeah, in the end, and we've.
But what happens with the money that has?
Yeah, that is a good question. Of course, that is a really interesting question. For example, in the cluster, of course, we are saving a lot of money, and this is something, of course, we are thinking about. Yeah, so where do we usefully spend this money now? So
looking forward to the discussion with the Bundesrechnungshof.
Yeah.
With the agency that oversees the spending of tax money.
Yeah, but I think the question is, when is traveling really necessary? So when do you need people? I think normally the people like, of course, we researchers like to travel, and we like to participate in every conference we can participate in. Yeah, and I think in the future we have to reduce our traveling expectations and our traveling in general. Yeah, so and I think this is good for this financial side of the funding system.
Christian, what happens with all the travel money that the DAAD hasn't spent this year?
Oh, we spend it on dinners and lunches and so on. I don't know. I mean,
it goes back to the federal government, and then
it depends. I should say. Oh, I'm sorry. It depends. Actually, we do have the possibility in the case of money by the Foreign Office to spend it in next year, so we can postpone it to 21, and that's very important. A very important flexibility we do have, but this only refers to the Foreign Office. In case of BMBF, the Ministry for Education and Research, that's not the case. So in this case, we need to spend the money until the end of or mid-February of next year. So we can stretch it a bit, but not that much.
So what will you do with all the money that you have to spend until then?
As you said, which means that we need to report this back, and this goes back to the Minister of Finance. And that's true. Not to the ministry, it goes to the Minister of Finance. It's important to know. So he can spend it on other issues, which we should, as a taxpayer, should find okay. Actually, we did travel less, and not only we did reduce the spending on it financially, but we reduced the carbon footprint. To come back to the other question, and I think we all found out that yes, as you said, Mr. Conermann, you can solve a lot of questions without a physical meeting in Singapore or in Anchorage. That's true, and this is something I think which will last for the next time. Just to add to what you have said, what may we count as an added value of the last months? In very simple terms, digital. How do you say? Systems, hardware, software, and so on. Zoom, as you mentioned. I mean, the level on which we are now working in terms of digital devices is very different from 6 months ago. Even in hardware, we did buy, I think 600 laptops for our staff in order to let them
have
be
like 600 people staff, right?
1,000.
Okay,
and
so almost everybody has one now.
Almost everybody has and needs to be able to work in mobile terms and work in home office. So that changed.
DAAD could have done that earlier.
Yes, we did, if we had the money. Well, yes, we started that, and obviously we did experience home office and things like that. And as I think every institution can tell you, in this respect, COVID-19 really made a big difference in terms of the organization of labor, the organization of work.
That's something that I observe, that there's this overall sense of empowerment at many institutions, that you suddenly experienced that you're still capable of doing something. I mean, I kind of exaggerate that, but there were some institutions that kind of were under the impression that everything is too complicated nowadays and there can be no decisions. And whenever I speak with people from institutions, public institutions, they're really happy about this experience that actually something happened very fast. That's some experience that you would share for the DAAD?
Yes, I would, and in order not to talk now only about us, about DAAD, we have now a steady conference with partners worldwide in video conferences, obviously, and we've been talking to the IAE, the Institute of International Education in New York and Washington. The president is Alan Goodman, and he told us that he was surprised by the level of creativity of his own staff, which he had never seen in this way. So by an instance, everybody tried to rethink the processes and the products and the communication and so on, and a lot of new ideas came up with this. So that's not only an observation we do on ourselves.
Stefan.
I think, we call it boom boost, Zoom boost, this way around. So, but I think no, the digitization. There's a boost in digitization, and I think this is something. This is really an added value of the more or less of the pandemic, because while I think otherwise we would have needed years, to come. Well, of course, to develop the digitization situation in the university, but in other institutions as well. So I think this is something that is really things are really speeded up by this. When it comes to digitization, by the crisis. And the second point where I would like to come back to the second is a home office, or what we call home office, because I think we are rethinking the working situation in the university, but in other big companies and institutions as well. So I think we send 30, 45, 50% of our work, of our administrative staff to their homes and to be asking them to work remotely. And they wanted to, not everybody, but I think 50% of these people would like to stay at home for not only 100%, but I think 80%. And that is something we have to. We have to think about this situation in the future, how we will cope with this situation, and in the end, for a university like this, who has a really big problem when it comes to buildings and whatever, these working spaces. So I think this will reduce the challenges we have with providing people with working places. Mm-hmm. So we can, I would say, reduce the space the university needs for the administrative staff and for the researchers, I think by 30% or something. I think if we let the people work remotely.
You wanted to add something?
If I may add, you mentioned administrative staff. And coming back to internationalization, I think it is very important to remember that we are still needing to digitize or digitalize student data in order to have them portable to other systems, other countries, other universities. That's a big project the BMBF is pushing forward, and we are cooperating with them. So I think that would be a big advantage if students could simply travel to Toulouse, to Moscow, wherever, and their data are safe and certified in a certain database available. That would be a big step forward.
Thank you very much. At this point, I would really like to invite you in the virtual audience and also in the audience here in Bonn to take part in our discussion via the chat or the question-answer function, or you can, again, also share your video and audio with us and ask questions or give us comments to our discussion. I think that right now there are no questions yet. So we just continue, and you let us know if you like to add something to our discussion. So if we look at the internationalization process in and after Corona from a more global point of view, my question is there do you foresee any substantial change to the overall workings of the internationalization as we know it in research and also in teaching? Is this just like a bump in the road? And afterwards, we are a little bit more digitized than before, and we might not travel to every conference, but maybe only to every second conference. And there might be, it will take 2 or 3 years before we're back at the numbers of international students, but then we will be back at. So is it just a little bump in the road, historically seen? Or is there something like a real shift that is happening, maybe even a shift away from all this competition that we were talking about all day long, the market-driven approach in many systems. So bump or shift? Anna-Katharina.
Well, I'm first of all tempted to say I think the hybrid will become the new norm. I don't think that there is a way back towards the analog and only the analog, but I think we will all end up basically living internationalization by combining the digital and the analog experiences. But your second part of your question was on a substantial higher meta level, basically, about the transformational shifts within economy and society, if I understand correctly.
Not only not the whole society, but the overall process of internationalization, talking about the internationalization of research and teaching. Is this, I would argue that if everything is a little bit more digital than before, that's not a major shift. That is just a little transformation. The question is, will the overall structure be basically the same?
So if I could rephrase the question a little bit more to fit maybe the context I'm thinking about, one could ask, does what we experience right now contribute to decolonizing of the academy, for instance? Then I would probably say at the moment not yet. That would require basically also a substantial shift in the hiring practices here. It would require a shift in our incentive structures towards, for instance, valuing papers in local languages substantially or similarly to papers in journals in English or, basically English-speaking journals. So it would require a shift in our whole incentive and performance mechanisms. And I don't really see indications quite yet that this is happening and coming out of the current digitalization of internationalization, if one wants to put it that way. But I would be very happy if I was wrong.
Thank you very much. Tim.
Yes, I would like to add and maybe also back Anna-Katharina's statement regarding the question whether there is a more stable, or let's say more closer international collaboration in science and technology. I think this question is not easy to answer because we don't know about the economic effects of the crisis, especially in threshold and developing countries. I don't know if these are the right PC terms to use in your policy field, but in the global south. So whether there will be major economic downfalls in these countries that then affect the very academic institutional system is hard to predict. That these countries, or let's say that academics in these countries and their institutions already before Corona have a challenging situation to be part of the world science system is clear. And that already affects access to journals, to publication repositories. So the open access movement that we've seen over the last years is an ephemeral thing that has started, and we do not know whether that has led to fundamental changes yet. So I'm rather on the dystopian side and would say that if Corona hits hard economically in these countries, I do not expect that we have become altruists throughout the crisis and will pull these countries into the science system of the world. I'm very skeptical about that. The second aspect that we haven't talked about at all is academic or scientific advice mechanisms that have experienced a time of closer collaboration due to the pandemic. So yes, we have systems like the Joint Research Center in the EU. We have our, I don't know the English word, Ressortforschungseinrichtungen that are connected in a global and European system. So the Robert Koch Institute and the like are interconnected and sharing data and experience, but that has intensified throughout mechanisms such as INCSA or SAPIR on the EU level with Corona. My hope is that this will also spill over to other effects whenever scientific expertise is needed to inform policymaking on an international and cross-border level.
Thank you very much. I'll just go ahead.
Okay,
first,
I think Anna raised a very, very interesting question. So I'm really reflecting on what you said. So I think if you understand internationalization as a power of different knowledge systems, then of course, I would say you're absolutely right. There is no shift. If of course there might be power struggle between kind of a Chinese version, a Chinese version or Chinese version of knowledge production, and another version of knowledge production that comes from the colonized, formerly colonized colonized states, and of course the Western thinking at the third position here in this kind of power struggle. Then I would say no. Then we don't see a shift. Then it's just a bump on the road, and then it's not predictable what the future will bring. And if I don't know whether there will be a one-to-one connection between what's going on now and what we see in the future.
Thank you very much. Michael Hoch, the rector of the University of Bonn.
Yes, I have a little comment. So I think you mentioned the fact whether this is a bump, let's say, this is how you put it, I think, for digitalization or a persistent change. And I think that depends, or will depend very much how long it will last. Right, so, and it's not clear whether, for example, the next semester and even the summer semester could be affected similarly, that we have to move more to the digital world, and then I think the change would be more persistent, as opposed to if this lasts only shortly, then I think, you know, it may go back at least to some extent to what we had before. But there's another aspect I'd like to bring into the discussion. I think this is what they call digital exclusion, right? Because there's many people who have no access to digital, you know, tools, and of course not only in the developed countries or so, but very, very much there too. So, but also here, if there's some, you know, percentage of the students who have no access, so who have problems basically to follow, you know, digital lectures and so. And this is something that we have to turn towards, right, and think about ways how to solve this issue. And along with that comes also the fact of data security. So what we noticed is there's very few, in fact, maybe there is no video conference system which allows you to have a good performance, meaning that, I don't know, 500 people can participate and at the same time provides data security. And this is something we also realize, right? There is nothing on the market, and we have to join forces, I think, also from the side of the universities to really come up with such a development, and not to develop, so every university develops, you know, their own tools. That doesn't work. So also solidarity, or maybe the, you know, to kind of to develop something jointly, that will be a very important task for the future.
Thank you very much. You want to add to that, or? Thank you very much, Michael Hoch. There was this one just question for clarification that went away now. That was to Christian Müller. It was about your remark about student data, I think. And there was the question if you were referring to the European student card, I think is it called, right? That was the question, if you were referring to that.
Sorry, yes. This is one of a small set of projects which are addressing that question of how could you make student data portable and available at any place, building up a repository or building up a database. Yes, European Student Card is one of the possible solutions for that. I'm not sure if the Student Card really covers all aspects. We would see, you have been mentioning, Tim Flink, that at your university still professors do have to sign a paper which says, yes, we have been there. From there to a international portability of student data, that's a long way to go. So yes, there are several projects going on at the moment. The major project I can mention, which is called PIM, which is from the BMBF, and that exactly addresses the question of how to build a repository in which for as you mentioned, Rector Hoch, for all universities, a similar or the same standard is defined and is developed.
Let me get back to the one question I asked earlier about the effects on internationalization. And we have been through this era of globalization for many years now. And as we heard earlier today, along with this trend of globalization, there was this trend of more and more competition. And I really wonder if there is a chance, an opportunity here that's presenting in a way that obviously the globalization might come to a stop for some time, or might not even be the same afterwards again. And from what you answered so far, everybody, you don't seem to believe that there's also a real chance to change the workings of the internationalization, that there might be more cooperation, that there will be less competition, that we will move a little bit closer to what we heard earlier when Karl Dittrich spoke about internationalization. Is that really completely out of our imagination, and will we just be back at this brain drain, brain gain situation afterwards? I'm still wondering if is it necessarily only a bump, or can there be a real shift? And what do we need to make it a real shift, Tim? Is there anything that we can do about it? But all of you seem to be pretty pessimistic about that there can be a real shift.
Well, I'm not saying that the shift couldn't be possible, but my working hypothesis is that the system is, or at least our system that I got to know over the last years, had a pretty extorted level of competition that overrode, so to speak, the collaborative aspects of science. So the entire idea of excellence or frontier research is being built on rugged individualism, on an individual and an institutional level. And I'm rather skeptical about the collaborative element that will now, due to the crisis moment, rise in stock and pushes back the competitive elements. Why should it?
Well, maybe because people realize that they have to work more closely together to cope with a pandemic like that we need more international cooperation research-wise. Christian?
I mean, if you take the pandemic itself and the research on the virus, on the epidemic development, on development of drugs and vaccines and so on, I think there's a large register on international collaboration, collaborative research on that, which is working. If you take a country which I know a little bit better, which is Brazil, so there are many research labs which are now working on clinical studies in Brazil. Why? Because they have very large numbers, and many patients are in hospitals. So you can practically you can access them, which means that for many research labs in pharmaceutical research, it's very important to have this connection to partners in those countries. So
but
in a sense,
something only that only happens during the pandemic, or?
I don't think so. At least those I do know, which is, for instance, the University of Münster and its pharmaceutical department. They have had ongoing cooperations with Brazil for many years, and now they can build on that and say, well, there's an opportunity for us. So these are the examples I do see.
Unfortunately, I'm quite pessimistic. So that this is only a bump, not a shift. For example, well, of course, people who would like, or researchers who would like to come up with a medication against the virus or for the virus. Yeah, so of course they are working together, but of course there is a fight. Yeah, it's a fight for the medication. So in the end, of course, it's about money and it's about the profit, and that's it. Yeah, so.
Let's take in another question from the virtual audio. Oh, sorry, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you very much. I'd like to just ask a very similar question as a moderator just asked, but rephrasing a little bit. And then this pandemic, COVID-19, will die down, or that's going to come to the end someday, maybe next year, year after next. But this age of globalization will have another pandemic. It's eventually, maybe 5 years later and 10 years later, because in Asia we had MERS and the SARS and so on. So that will come back, pandemic. So my question is, this is rather big question, really. Should we really stop or slow down this globalization? And then this is one way to stop another bad of this pandemic, or learning these lessons from this pandemic. Can you sort of prepare for this next pandemic? you know, you don't stop in the globalization. We have another pandemic sooner or later. Then what kind of preparation can you make? So rather sort of, you know, some large questions, but this is what I direct ask the panel. So if any of you have got any answer to that.
Thank you very much. So how can we prepare for the next pandemic in science and research and international relationships? Anna? Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think part of the question also was, can we turn globalization or the speed of globalization down a bit? No? Can we slow it down? I find it quite important to say in that discussion that obviously turning it down, slowing it down also comes with substantial costs. I mean, we have global value chains that enable that foster a lot of wealth here, but also create jobs, of course, in many countries. So regionalizing our value chains and production mechanisms is not really a sustainable solution, globally speaking. I also, or part of that, or taking this as into the next round of trying to answer your question is then to say, yes, we need to learn from it, because I think, as you pointed out correctly, pandemics are very likely to reoccur, and if it's not a pandemic, it will be different types of crises. You mentioned climate change. We have substantial population growth in some areas. There's a number of sort of big mega trends that are likely to develop dynamics that cause ruptures, basically, or crises. I think the learning is actually the crucial part, and there obviously we are now, I would say, really challenged in order to not only try to learn now, but distract from the learning some structures that will enable our societies to mitigate and adapt. And that is sort of a task that we in industrialized countries, we invest 10% of our GDP at the moment into stimulus packages. So we try to already use the crisis for large-scale modernization programs that enable this learning long term. But in many other countries, in middle-income countries, it's 3%, and in least developed countries, which are 47 worldwide, it's only 1% of the GDP that is invested into stimulus packages. So how do we internationalize that learning on a structural level? I think that's a very important question, and we haven't quite found the answers yet.
Stefan?
Well, from my perspective, it depends a little bit on the time between this pandemic and the next one. So I think if the next one will be in 50 years, so I think we probably will forget about the problems and the challenges of this pandemic. But I think if the next pandemic will come up in 10 years, so then the situation is quite dramatically changing, because then we have to face that pandemic belongs to our lives. Yeah. So, but in the end, my impression is that if the pandemic dies out, I'd say in 2 years, then we have to go back to the Sustainable Development Goals. Yeah, so they are more important, and I think then where globalization is of course needed. Yeah, to challenge or to face the problems, the problems in the world we have.
You want to add, or should we? Okay, then let's go to Sandra Gilgan. One question from the virtual audience. On the note of ethnographic research that can't be done due to the pandemic, just some rough thoughts. Do you think it would be possible for certain research designs to be shifted into the digital world? We have heard how digital communication altered interaction between accessibility of people. Could digital research maybe open new doors? Could we explore what digital research can do, what on-site research can't, and think of a future of hybrid ethnographic research as well? Anna-Katharina?
Yeah, thank you. I would first of all say yes. it is possible to some degree, especially if we look into, for instance, the communicative or the discursive construction of reality. You already pointed to it as well. Then, of course, it's fascinating at the moment to observe how we all, in these digital environments that we spend our days in, communicate slightly differently than we would probably in an analog room, and what that does to the building of networks, what that does to building these spaces in a way. So if you have research projects that look into the construction of, for instance, the communicative of construction of something, of a particular topical space, then I think it is possible to transfer it into the digital realm. But nevertheless, I also think it's very important to point out that that is then a very partial perspective on a communicative process. And we all know how much more there is, how much better we can read a person when we see that person in front of us, when we see the body language, when we can interact on so many more levels than just the actual exchange of words. So maybe I pass.
10% agreement with that. It's absolutely possible to do this kind of research, and I think there's plenty of research on digital spheres and ethnographic research especially, and there's also all sorts of hybrid things going on. So a friend of mine, for instance, he did research on supervisory interactions, just handing over dictaphones to supervisors, and asked them whether the supervisor and the PhD would agree to basically record their interactions, and there are so many different ideas that could be implemented. Yes, but again, it's only one part of the picture, and I mean, I tweeted in the morning, and this was not a joke. What a weird experience after 1 year. I think the last time I was here was in your research workshop at the DAAD. Was it in February or January?
Yes, February. Yeah.
To be back on a real kind of experience, going to a conference and meeting real people, and at the same time having the virtual interaction, and it's completely different than just being in a webinar kind of situation. Yes.
Stefan?
Well, no, also, I don't. Well, it's a good question, but in the end, of course, from the perspective of the cluster, of course, we have PhD students who are in the middle of writing a PhD thesis. So I think they can't wait for a solution. They have to decide now what to do. This is a problem for them, and I think we have 40 PhD students. I think 10 of them are now. Well, they really don't know what to do, because they started 12 months ago, and now they have to refigure everything, and this is the kind of problematic because this needs time. So I think, of course, you can do it, but I think, you have to of course to build up all these digital research facilities, but they are not there. So there's a problem.
Maybe let's spend 2 minutes on the very German or European situation when it comes to funding. Christian, I would like to know what are your expectations towards the funding of internationalization, of exchange, of also international research corporations. As we all know, the public, the taxpayer money is not really more than it has been a year ago, and the overall financial situation of the government has worsened, drastically worsened. So what does it mean to the financing or the financial foundation of exchange of international corporations when it comes to the German situation at the DAAD, for example? What does it mean for the next 1 or 2 years?
Yeah, that's the $1 billion question, and I would say that actually we are not that that much concerned on these in this time span. We are not very much concerned. I think we should be concerned about.
So I should ask about 5 years, maybe.
Yes, talk about 5 years. Yeah, because actually, I mean, the federal budget for next year is more or less ready, more or less, and we are getting quite well out of it. 22 will be different. It will be more difficult, but on a long or a middle time span, the question is really whether, as you put it, internationalization will be regarded differently, or international mobility will be regarded differently. And now, obviously, we are working on a series of programs which are not only based on physical mobility, but on hybrid mobility, blended mobility, however you
which might give the politicians the impression that it's a cheaper kind of internationalization, that they don't need to spend that much money on that.
Then we tell them it is not cheap; it's very expensive, obviously. And as we all know, I mean, if you turn your Vorlesung, your what is it called?
Lecture.
Into a digital virtual version, you see that it is not cheap. It is very expensive. You need much more time to do that, and you need colleagues, you need technicians, and you need technology, and so on. So it is not very cheap, actually. But anyway, I mean, we are working on different new programs, which address exactly that question: how will we work internationally, be mobile internationally, be collaborative internationally, and how we will build in digital and virtual elements. So in that regard, we are working on it, and we are quite optimistic that we will have more or less the same political underpin for that. Actually, the support of the German Bundestag is very strong for institutions like the Humboldt Foundation, or like us, or like DFG is out of question, or even the Goethe Institute, which goes through very, very difficult times at the moment, much more difficult than we do.
So let me ask the remaining panelists here: are you just as relaxed in regard to funding?
In general? No, I think in general, my personal opinion.
Maybe the microphone.
My personal opinion is that in general that Germany has the best funding system in the world. So if I see the funding system in other countries, even in European countries, so it's kind of like paradise. Of course, there's there's a lot of money.
So you're relaxed when it comes to the next 2 or 3 or 5 years when it comes to international cooperation and exchange.
Yeah, no. So I don't see the point is that, of course, there might be. We will save money when it comes to mobilization, but I think they have to give the money back if the situation is going to change. So I think it's just that they keep the money and that's it. And now you have to deal with less money. So, but I think in the end, of course, there will be again some kind of mobility that costs a lot of money. So that will be there for sure, but I think in a reduced way. So I think, in my opinion, the outcome will be a mix. We will have to keep in mind that it is not so sustainable if we travel, that it is can save money if we don't have conferences with 20 or 25 persons coming from all the parts of the world. So I think this is something we will keep in mind, and we will save money. But I think, of course, there will be time again. There will be the time again for seated meetings, of course.
Anna-Katharina?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not as relaxed, probably, to say it that way. If one looks at the budget of our government for the coming year and the years after, I do find it problematic that the BMBF, so our Research Education Ministry, the budget is not going up. It's staying the same for the next 4 years. That's what is planned. It's partly even decreasing a little, which out of a perspective where you would say, well, if you want to use this crisis as a major learning event, and if you regard education and research as the policy area that assures basically that learning takes place across generations into the future, and that a reshuffling of wealth into the future generation is assured, then that should be an area that needs needs to simply be on the map right now. If I then look at the budget development within development cooperation, international cooperation, the field that I'm involved in as well, I see that there is a bump at the moment for immediate dealing with the corona crisis, and that bump still exists for the coming year. So it's an additional 3.9 billion, but it then drops. And it then drops dramatically and lower than where it was last year. Where I would say, well, it's, you know, the immediate coping is, of course, that's what we are concerned about at the moment. But longer-term adaptation and preparation, structural preparation for the crisis to come, will take longer than that. So, no, I'm not as relaxed.
In a minute, I'm going. Sure. Yeah.
Just one point, because it reminded me when you were talking, Mr. Conermann. One thing which really should concern us and bother us is the question of Brexit, because Brexit really takes a lot of money out of the European-British cooperation, and this is really not good. And there we do feel a big problem.
I would absolutely back the two last statements, not only because of Brexit, but because of the economic effects that Brexit will have, not only on the UK, with people having not that much money in their pockets anymore, but also because it has major repercussions on Germany as an export nation. And that also will affect the federal budget, obviously. And spending on research and development and higher education. Plus, the European Central Bank fiscal policy is leading to a constant inflation at the moment, so the money is even less worth. And last but not least, how can you be relaxed as a postdoc in Germany?
All right, it's almost time to sum up our discussion and also in a way sum up the day, and I will ask you in a minute, what's your personal main lesson, if so to speak, of Corona when it comes to international relations or international cooperation in research? But before that, to give you a little bit time to think about it, there's one more question by Benjamin Kofi Nyako, and he's asking about the uncertainties for internationalization and mobility due to COVID-19. Is there a possibility of seeing countries impose new academic conditions since quality is not assured with virtual scholarship? So if there is no real being there and there is only virtual studying and doing research, what does it do to standards? What does it do to, well, maybe new thresholds that will be installed or something like that? Christian?
I think that's a very good question, which I think we cannot answer yet. But he's absolutely right. I mean, if you transfer a mobility stage into a virtual mobility, we still do not know how exactly assessment of certification of outcome will work. And this is something we now need to work on, but we don't have the answer. The question is correct.
Anybody wants to add to that? Tim?
I just had the question, why were the so-called Fernuniversitäten so remarkably silent in the crisis? Because I think it would have been great to see now how they, as opposed to normal universities, or put it the upside down, normal universities cope vis-a-vis, our remote universities with such, a situation, whether there are learning effects and whether it really makes such a difference being present or being, far away and then come in for specific moments. But yeah,
you were talking about universities that are specialized in distance learning. Fernuniversitäten in Germany. Yeah. So let's move on to my final question. I mean, we can go on and talk about this for a long time, but I would like to ask you to answer my question in just 1 minute or so. Very short statement. There are many lessons that we can draw from Corona when it comes to international cooperation, when it comes to internationalization. Which is your personal one, the one lesson that you actually would say is the most important for you of the last 6 or 7 months. Could be something from your own research project, could be something on a more global level, but there are 2 requirements, one lesson and only 1 minute. Christian, you want to start?
No. Yes, I think what I like most, and actually I like most in this discussion, was the term of trust you used for several times, and we pretty much think, and that was very clear now in these last months, that the more you work virtually and online and digitally, the more you need trust into the persons you are talking to, which you hardly are able to build in these environments. So you need to have had a prior meeting with the person, prior experiences of working together. And this is, for us, it's the most important, one of the most important things of funding international mobility.
Mm-hmm. So it's about trust. Stefan.
Well, I think, very personal. Well, this is a very personal lesson. I think the Corona pandemic totally changed my personal idea of communication. Yeah, and astonishingly, interesting enough, I find it good. So I see the advantages. Yeah, so I think, of course, there are disadvantages, but I see the advantages of this kind of communication, the virtual communication as well, in the academic world, in the private world, but I think when it comes to internationalization as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Anna-Katharina.
Well, in many ways, I take away from it in a positive manner how flexible we are in many ways in organizing our work and working through data symmetries that we hadn't had time basically to look at in reorganizing research projects. I also find it important to somehow find the right balance, and I think we need more dialogues on this, between on the one side saying, we can cope with it for a while, without sidelining the importance that we worked so hard for, to make clear that it's so important to go to the field to work with our partners. And maybe drawing from this, for me an important lesson also is that we are indeed social beings. So we can adjust to some degree, but we can't fully compensate.
Thank you very much. Tim Flink.
Very personal one. I think humbleness is what I take out of that, because the very first up to 3 months I was taking care of our children while my wife was working, and I had thought, well, I would never publish a paper this year, and 3 came out, and it was possible. On the other hand, it was a very bizarre feeling when your colleagues in Italy, in Spain, and France were undergoing a real lockdown with people dying around you. That makes you humble. And the third one was that it was absolutely necessary to somehow enforce communication on the virtual level with your colleagues at home, so at Humboldt University with our team in the project, and especially with students, because you think that everybody is fine and coping well in such a situation that is probably borne by more solitude, but a lot of people are not, and we shouldn't forget about that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you here on the panel. Thank you very much to you here in the audience in Bonn, and also to the virtual audience. And I won't even try to summarize the whole day. I mean, we've been together since 9:30 today, and it's been a long day. It's been a very interesting day, and I think we learned a lot about all those different perspectives on internationalization that are out there. Theoretically, most of them more theoretical perspectives. I think that this was a very enriching day, and I'm glad that I was here with you, and I'm not that glad that I can't be there tomorrow, because there is one more interesting day of the conference, Why Internationalization, and it will be about more practical perspectives and realities of internationalization of higher education. So we will be a little bit continue what we started tonight here, that we're talking about practical perspectives, the real life experiences after the more theoretical approaches that we heard about today. Kickoff will be at 9:30. As I said, unfortunately I can't be there. There will be Holger Impekhofen as the moderator, and since I won't be there, thank you very much. I would like to say goodbye and wish you all the best, and thank you very much for being here, for being online today. Have a great night. Thanks for being here. Thanks.